So, what do you need to get good sounding transmitted audio on the radio? Well, today I'm going to run through the whole setup that I've got here and some of the other options that are available to you. Right, first of all, we need to define what we're trying to achieve with this broadcast audio chain. And in this video, I'm going to look at something that creates nice, clear audio, the highest quality possible, rather than trying to get the furthest distance with audio, or make it the most penetrating, the loudest audio possible. Perhaps we'll explore that on future videos. What we're trying to avoid is sort of muffled, distorted audio. So anything which reduces the intelligibility of the signal. So I'm going to give you a run through my complete audio chain that I use for transmitting on the radio. And I'm using a thing by Universal Audio called an Apollo interface. And the Apollo interface has lots of plugins that you can enable in there. And a plugin is just an audio processing unit. And you can see all these slots around here. These are all spaces to put plugins in. And I can click a button there and go and select a plugin. I'm not going to add one into there at the moment. I've already put some plugins in here. And the first one, so in this analog 1 and 2, that's where my microphone is plugged into on the interface, comes into a preamp. So what I'm doing is taking the microphone input, it's going through an equalizer, so I've got the equalizer in here. So this is not just a preamp actually, it's got some kind of EQ control as well. It's got a compressor if you want to compress, and it's got an output control there. Few little features here, high and low gain. I've got it on high because that will introduce more saturation, more of the valve effect. And these valve preamps add quite a nice character to audio, quite a nice character to well, lots of things really, but I quite like the effect it has on my audio. It has some 48 volts phantom power enabled because that voltage is required to turn my microphone on. That actually runs the condenser element of the microphone. It then carries on down this list. I'm going into a, here we are, drag that from the other screen. I'm going into a microphone control system, and this is another thing unique to Universal Audio. And this allows me to select the microphone that I'm using and some other controls. So, I might select, for example, let's have an Ocean Way 800 there, and you can now hear my sound change. So that's all affecting the EQ of the sound, the response of the mic, and of course will depend on which microphone you're using to feed into the preamp in the first place. The next plugin is the CVOX. Now the CVOX here is getting rid of background noise, and you can see this. So this is the gain it's giving over the audio spectrum, I think, and it's dipping it down when I'm not talking, and that's very useful to cut out large background noises. Right, now come into the first compressor, and the reason I'm not using the compressor up here in the preamp is I want the audio gain to stay consistent all the way through to the CVOX. If I enable the compressor in here, it's going to change the background noise level depending on the volume of my audio. So that invalidates some of this noise reduction feature. So I'm deliberately not compressing before that. So I've got an extra compressor, which in my opinion, it happens to work better anyway, this compressor, than the one in the Century. And this is my limit control, my ALC, if you like, automatic limit control. This is, as I move away from the mic, let me come back here, it's keeping the volume fairly consistent, and I come in very close to the mic and it's giving more gain reduction. I've got a high pass filter on there so that the low end of my voice doesn't affect the gain of this preamp. So plosives, sort of P's you get, don't affect this gain. I've done a whole video on compression, so I'm not going to go into the detail of it in this video, and I'll put a link on the on this video to go and watch that. It's quite an in-depth subject. Anyway, that's the gain control, the ALC with an opto compressor. I then go into a second compressor, which is doing a hard limit. It's in nuke mode, so any volume above the reduction of the previous compressor is going to kick in and limit it. And I've got this little feature here enabled, which increases the gain to DS my audio. If I so what it's doing is it reduces the gain of the S's more than the rest of the audio, just to keep those under control. And I've got a bit of distortion enabled just to add a bit of second harmonic distortion too, so it makes the audio sound a bit warmer. It's very subtle effects, all this. If I just turn that one off, I can definitely hear it here in my headphones, and just, you know, I quite like the sound of that at the time. I change all of this all the time, but at the moment I quite like that bit of extra warmth. That's the first set of plugins on the strip. All of these other things here on the Apollo are mixer knobs to control the level of audio that goes on to the next stage. And you can see here I'm sending it to aux 1 and aux 2, and that's about it. And aux 1 and aux 2 are these channels here. So it comes out of there, goes into here and into here. And I'm using these to give two completely different audio outputs. So one of them's going to my radio, the other one's going into this recording, actually. So I've got a computer one, which is this one, and the radio one, which has a very different EQ. That's the radio EQ. And this one, that's the EQ I'm using now. So you can see there are very different requirements. Again, I've gone into EQ in another video. I'll put a link above. Go and have a look at that. But you need to take lots of low end out of the radio because of the reduced bandwidth. Just otherwise it sounds unbalanced. Anyway, first thing is going into this little piece of kit, which is the vitalizer. And that's just adding a little bit of saturation, some extra harmonics into the audio, which I quite like the sound of. That's it switched off there just for information. But I was quite liking what that was adding to my audio, so I'll pop that back on. I can't really go into any more details of what that's doing. I really don't know, haven't studied it that much. I've just set that purely on how it sounds. We've just looked at the EQ there. That's the EQ it's going through. If I turn that off there, you should hear quite a lot of difference. So I've taken some of the low end out and a bit of mid range and so on. You can see the curve there. We then go into a dynamic EQ, and this is doing the noise gate. So this EQ here is configured to so a peak below a certain threshold, that filter comes on. So it's cutting it down by -20 dBs, and the filter frequency is at 20 kilohertz. So it's kind of a way of simulating a noise gate. Normally you'd have a separate noise gate plugin. As you can see in here, I'm quite limited on the number of effects, the number of plugins I can put in the chain. So that's how I'm doing the noise gate in here. Little bit of extra EQ I've decided to put in there. A little bump. Let me turn this off again, actually, so you can see that profile there all the time. And I've got this filter here, which is a deplosive. Can you see that? So as that bounces down, it's taking some of the plosives out of my audio. I find that detecting plosives at about 60 hertz seems quite efficient. So I've got a narrow filter to do that. On the side chain, and it's reducing the audio below 200 Hertz. So that's my deplosive there. One other filter here is about 2.2 kilohertz, and I'm getting rid of some sort of chop. Not if I do ch ch ch, or yeah, that's the best noise really. It's so there was something in my voice I didn't like very much. Let's turn that off. Ch ch, chop chop, chop chop, chop chop. It was just a bit harsh for me, and I wanted to reduce that, so that's what that point's in there for. Again, dynamic EQ I do cover on the compression video. And then a reverb. Now reverb is quite important. It's not there to give a big hall effect or something on there. It's quite a subtle effect. If I turn it off, there we are. Now I don't know how well you can hear that, but a reverb is simulating reflections within a room. So now it's off. All you're hearing is quite an intimate version of my voice. I'm talking very close to the microphone, and it's a bit like I'm talking right into your ear. So if I was to lean into you and talk, this is what you would hear in real life, and it kind of sounds a bit too close. Like I'm invading your personal space, I suppose, with all this compression and that going on, cutting out the room noise. If I turn that on, it's there to soften the audio and make it sound like I'm a little bit further away from you. And it's just slightly more pleasant to listen to. You don't really want me whispering into your ear. Not many people do anyway. So that's what that's there for, and I think it just adds adds something to the audio. Hope you agree anyway when you're listening to that. And that is it. All of these other settings are just where it's sending the audio out of analog connections on the back of the interface itself and so on. The rest of that is doing the work. There is extra stuff going on in the radio itself. Now we're in the radio, so you're listening to my audio now as is coming from the monitor, and in here there are various other settings. So actually the first setting to note is I'm on a 4.2 kilohertz transmission bandwidth, and I am doing some extra equalization. So depending on which transmission bandwidth I'm using, I'm just tweaking this slightly because I've EQ'd the Apollo system for wideband 8 kilohertz. So let me go for 8K. Here we are. And in here, I've got the EQ dead flat. I'm rolling it off a little bit at the top end because I think it makes it sound a little bit better when you listen on that bandwidth on air. So I tend to just pull off 3, in this case 6 dBs, right at the maximum bandwidth. And in audio, most of the settings that control the audio chain are in this DSP section within Thetis, if you're using Thetis. And the AGC ALC is the first thing. Now I've got no leveler enabled, so that's the kind of slow compressor analogy, if you like. And so if I turn that on, I'd end up with 1 second control on the audio, and I'm not getting any gain there at all. See, the leveler gain is only dipping down a little bit now and again, so it's not making much difference. Because I've got it well controlled in the Apollo, that doesn't need to be on. If you're not controlling the gain so well, then having that switched on is quite important. Remember though that if you compress too much using this, the reverb sound, the tail on any reverb you've got enabled is going to come right up, and I'll demonstrate that actually shortly. The ALC is like a limiter, so there's a final limiter there which is very important for a radio system. There's an absolute maximum value of audio that you can send out over the air, and I can see there that by this ALC compression meter, it's reducing my gain slightly now and again, which is kind of how you want it. I don't want to really heavily compress or limit the audio within Thetis itself. So they are my audio settings in the radio. And there's one important thing to note about Thetis, is when pure signal's on, if you use pure signal, it can affect the monitored audio. In fact, it normally does. So I'm just going to turn off pure signal now while you're listening, and see if you can hear the difference there. There should now sound a bit clearer. So I've just gone and done that last recording with pure signal on, which may have been adding a bit of distortion to my audio. So I'll just demonstrate that on and off again there. So yeah, listen with pure signal off when you're adjusting your audio. Now, ironically, pure signal does make your audio sound much better. It reduces the distortion on the broadcasted audio, but not on the monitor. So please don't take it that I'm saying pure signal distorts the audio, because it doesn't. Greatly improves the broadcast. I've done a video on the effect of pure signal, so I'm going to put a link to it now on the video. It's worth a watch if you haven't seen it before. Right, so the effect of compression on the reverb. So this is the reverb I'm using at the moment. If I turn up the mix a little bit more, 1, 2, you should be able to hear the kind of sound I'm adding in there. So there's not much of a tail anyway, but so I go to 50%. So I'm just exaggerating the effect of it very slightly. Right, so I'm now just going to remove this one here. Just got rid of that dynamic EQ. And I need to give it a little bit more volume to get the level back up. So that's now given me a bit of room, so I can move this one down here. And let me just check that's, yeah, so I've got my 50% reverb there. And now I'm going to add in another distressor. And there we go. So I'm going to go onto onto this octo setting there. So it's a nice kind of slow reverb, and the levels do look about right, luckily. And the more I compress, let me turn this up. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear the reverb increasing? Because what's happening is the gain is so much higher. It's actually the reduction's dropping down and letting the reverb tail, as I call it, come back up afterwards. Let's go a bit faster on the compressor. So actually I've just nuked it again because I want to stop too high an audio level going to the system. Let me speed up the release time. That's slowing it down. Now I've got a very fast release. Let's see what that's doing to the reverb. That's the reverb on. That's the reverb off. 1, 2. That's the reverb on. I can definitely hear the tail there very clearly. Then I turn off the compressor and the reverb effects decreased again. Just to clarify, let me see if there's a better reverb preset here. So let me go for an auditorium. Okay. It does sound like we're an auditorium. That's doing the job. Now if I turn off the mix, so it's just a subtle auditorium. There we go. Well, 10%. Now I turn on the compressor. There we are. Now you can really hear the reverb come up there, can't you? Because that is greatly amplifying the tail. Anyway, there's an exaggerated version of that. Turn that off there. So if you didn't hear it properly on the last reverb, Hopefully you heard it then, no problem. So here's a diagram that I've done of what I think should be in the ideal audio chain. And I'm going to run through this and compare it to what I've done in the Apollo. And hopefully it'll clarify a few things and why certain items are in the order that they are. So first of all, the microphone. So I'm using a Sphere DLX by Universal Audio, and it's a modeling microphone. So the microphone combined with one of the plugins which I showed in the Apollo allows you to emulate lots of different microphones. It lets you change the effect of the proximity effect, the directionality of the microphone, and various aspects about the microphone's response. Interestingly, I've settled on a calibrated curve. So one of the options is a linear setting, which is effectively calibrates the Sphere microphone to a flat curve, and I take out all of the proximity effect. So I'm trying to make the amount of low end in my voice the same depending on how close I am to the microphone, and giving it a nice flat frequency response. I've tried all the other microphones in there and I prefer it calibrated flat. The next section is the preamp, and the main part of the preamp's in the hardware inside the Apollo X6. So that's taking the microphone input and it's amplifying it to a level which is useful within the Apollo, which gives it a good signal to noise ratio. Effectively, it's getting all the digital numbers up because it's all done digitally in there up to a reasonable level for processing. I'm also doing some saturation in there because it's a tube preamp. So that's adding a bit of warmth, a little bit of distortion, just to try and make the audio sound a bit warmer. And no compression in there, but some of the EQ. So that next block there, the EQ, most of the unwanted sound is being taken out in that EQ before it gets to any of the compressors. And that's to stop that unwanted sound from controlling the gain level and effectively mixing with the rest of the audio. The next block's the noise reduction, and I'm doing that in the CVox plugin. And that's just eliminating as much of the background noise as possible without causing any artifacts on the audio. So most noise reduction units have some side effects, and this one isn't any different. But I've set that so that you can't hear it very much, and it gets rid of all the shack noise. So it gets rid of any fans I've got running in the linear amplifier and the radios. The most noise I get is from the air conditioner in here, and it gets rid of most of that. The next block is the noise gate or expander, and I'm using one of the filters in the dynamic EQ as an expander. So when the audio level drops below a threshold, the gain's reduced, and that has two effects. It completely eliminates any background noise when I'm not talking. So any noise that does get through the noise reduction system is completely eliminated. And the other thing it does is reduce any unwanted sounds from my mouth. So breath sounds, pops and clicks, and general things, lips smacking, whatever goes on in your mouth, creating those unwanted noises. It helps reduce that. The next block is the automatic level control, or the ALC, and that's being done in an Empirical Labs distressor compressor, and it's in opto mode. So it's got very slow attack and release time. It doesn't really colour the audio much at all. It's just good at keeping a good average level. The low end frequencies are side chained out of triggering that compressor. So any pops and bangs and that kind of thing doesn't affect the level of the audio that's going through. The exciter and saturation, that's being done at different places within the audio chain. There's no single place you need to do this. So some's being done in the preamp, in the tube preamp, and some's being done in the dynamics and compression, which I'll talk about in a moment. And it's all about adding a little bit of character to the audio, a little bit of distortion to make it sound good. It's a bit strange that some distortion can make it sound good, but it's all a matter of opinion, this really. And I tend to swing between enabling it and disabling it. I really like the clarity when you've got no distortion or minimum distortion in the system, but having a little bit of saturation in there just adds some warmth and increases the low end, makes it easier for me to bring up the low end frequencies, particularly below 100 Hertz. I've also got a vitalizer plugin in there deliberately for some saturation, and I'm not quite sure what this plugin's doing, but it'll be distorting parts of the audio spectrum and picking up on those harmonics, I'm sure. And I know there's some compression effects in there as well, and I've just adjusted that to mainly enhance the low end, again try and get some more body below 100 Hertz, and just to add a little bit of sparkle at the higher frequencies as well. But a fairly subtle effect, but I think it just adds to the overall character of the audio. Right, next, dynamics and compression. This is being done in a second distressor compressor and a dynamic EQ. So the distressor is taking out any transients which aren't caught by the ALC compressor, and it's in limiting mode. It's nuke mode is the limit mode. So any signals which are stronger than the threshold are immediately clamped. And there's also some distortion switched on in that as well. The distortion 2, which is helping with that saturation. There's also some de-essing being done by this compressor, and that's done by side chaining a filter which gives a bump, an increase in the frequencies typically associated with essing, and that just reduces the output level even more on the S's. And then of course we've got the reverb block, which at the moment I'm using a Realverb Pro, and to be honest it's not the best reverb I've got in the arsenal of plugins, but it's the best one that uses the minimum resources. So I've had to pick and choose what's in this Apollo to make sure that it doesn't use up too much DSP resource. So that concludes my whistle-stop tour of a full audio chain, and I hope you find that useful, particularly if you're just starting out trying to get good transmitted audio on your radio. If you've got any other questions about anything else to do with the chain, any of the plugins particularly, let me know, and perhaps I'll do some other videos focusing on a bit more detail. Enjoy the audio tweaking. It takes a long time to get it sounding exactly how you like, and it's never ending, to be honest, but enjoy the journey. That's the main thing, and good luck. 7-3. Thanks very much for watching, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.